Hello, I'm Tim Lynch. I'm your host of Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association, and we're brought to you live the third Wednesday of every month. If you would like to call in and ask a question, I invite you to do so. The number here is 617-708-3290. Again, 617-708-3290. Very happy about today's show. We're having the new executive director of GLAD, Janson come on the show, and he's going to tell us, not only remind us about the wonderful work GLAD does, but he's going to tell us about his vision for GLAD and what he expects to accomplish at GLAD over the next year. Janson, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
So you're the new executive director. How does that feel?
Well, it feels exciting and overwhelming and really humbling all at once. I think I've been at GLAD now for 8 years as an attorney doing the work, the litigation, the legislation to advance LGBTQ rights across New England and the nation. And so for me, this is a little bit of a shift where I'm no longer in the courtrooms, but rather talking to our supporters, doing shows like this to kind of talk about the need for us to really stick with it, make sure that we ensure full justice and equality for our entire community, and to really lead GLAD as the future of the movement.
Yeah, I have to say, I was very happy to hear about your selection because you gave a magnificent speech at the summer party.
That's very kind, thank you.
I remember standing there and saying, well, you have a wonderful understanding of what the needs are for the community, and I think GLAD, if I can say so myself, made an excellent selection. So why don't you remind our audience what exactly GLAD does, and then we'll talk about what the future.
Sure. So GLAD is a legal organization. We're based in Boston. We work primarily in New England, but we also have a national impact. And we work to advance LGBT rights with regards to issues such as marriage, anti-discrimination, parenting, youth and elder rights, the whole gamut. And we do it through different ways, different tools in our toolboxes. So sometimes we'll sue, like we did in the Goodrich case here in Massachusetts, where we sued the Commonwealth and successfully were able to make Massachusetts the first state in the country to allow same-sex couples to marry. Sometimes we go to legislatures and we ask them to pass laws. For example, we just got some really comprehensive, good family law protections passed in New Hampshire last session after some really devastating situations happening in the family courts where non-biological parents were being denied the ability to visit or have custody of their own children. And so we had to go to the legislature to fix that. Yeah. And then we do a lot of public education so that people know what their rights are. And then once they know what their rights are, making sure that they have the legal resources they need to enforce those rights. So we can give referrals to people. We have an information service called GLAD Answers that you can call or chat or email if you need legal information or a referral.
So you guys do an awful lot of stuff.
We try.
And you know, not only do you try, but you succeed on such a grand scale. So what, as a new executive, and this is just like a month or two.
December 1st, yes.
Yeah, so see, I got that right. As the new executive director of GLAD, how do you, what are your priorities for 2015?
Well, I think that there has been this sense in the last year or two that our work here in New England is done, right? We've achieved marriage equality. We have anti-discrimination protections in almost all 6 New England states, although New Hampshire still does not protect transgender individuals from discrimination, and Massachusetts does not protect transgender individuals from discrimination in public accommodations, such as restaurants and banks and businesses. So even on that front, we're still not there, but we certainly have made good progress in comparison to the rest of the country. And so GLAD's goal for the future is to really push the envelope, to really lead the future of the movement and show what the rest of the country what is possible if we really think big, dream big, imagine what we could create if we really think outside the box, really. And so my favorite example of this is to think about students and youth. And we know there's this epidemic of bullying in the country, especially against LGBT youth, but against many other youth as well too. And we've responded appropriately by passing laws prohibiting bullying, right? And that's all well and good. And we have just actually last session passed a bullying law here in Massachusetts that protects LGBTQ youth. But what if we weren't satisfied with just making sure that students aren't beat up in the hallways in their schools? That should just be a bare minimum in my eyes. Instead, what if LGBTQ youth were able to learn about LGBTQ history, literature, and even sex education within our school systems? Think of what a huge impact that would have on the next generation of youth growing up, having that affirmation that not only are they tolerated, but that they're celebrated. So that's the difference that GLAAD is trying to really highlight in New England. And I think that's important because I think the rest of the country has always looked at New England as being the beacon of hope.
Yeah.
And I hope we always continue to be that beacon of hope, to always be the standard bearers. Because what we do here in Massachusetts, I really think the rest of the country soon follows.
Well, indeed, they have been on a number of these fronts. But you spoke about LGBTQ youth, and I've heard many wonderful speakers from GLAAD, and indeed we've had many people on this program speak to the epidemic of unaccompanied LGBTQ homelessness, including here in Massachusetts, with statistics showing that up to 40% of them are homeless. What is GLAAD doing about that?
Well, it's a heartbreaking situation.
Yeah.
And we have, been working with many of the service providers that have been working with LGBTQ homeless youth to make sure that they are receiving the services they need without discrimination. But what is it about, where can we intervene to break that cycle, right? Because it really is a cycle. You have LGBTQ youth who are being rejected from their families, and then as a result go into the foster care system. We have a foster care system that does not consistently treat LGBTQ youth with dignity. And so many foster care workers and social workers may tell LGBTQ youth, oh, don't tell your foster parents that you're gay or transgender. They're just not going to understand, or just keep it quiet, or even as extreme as youth being bullied in group homes, right? So then these youth who are already being rejected from their families are being rejected from the systems that are supposed to protect them, and then they become homeless. And in that situations, they often have to, engage in survival crimes in order to survive and make money, and then that often puts them into the juvenile justice system. And so at each of these stages, GLAAD is working to try to intervene to make sure that no more youth kind of fall through those cracks. So for example, we just work with the Department of Youth Services, which oversees the juvenile justice system, and we worked with them to make sure that they have now the most progressive policies for LGBTQ youth in juvenile justice system in the country. And so that's one of the really exciting achievements we've had in the last year. That's
wonderful, and I think I like your point in the very beginning about, and I think that touches upon kids too, is that gays are not just gays, lesbians, transgender, are simply not to be tolerated but celebrated as part of the fabric of the American society. And I think if you succeed in that, a lot of these problems would go away. It's one thing to be tolerated, it's quite another thing to be fully integrated and accepted.
I think that's absolutely right. There was this makes me think of a recent tragedy in our community. 3 days after Christmas, there was a transgender girl in Ohio who had committed suicide. Her name was Leela Elkhorn, and she had so many obstacles in her life, from parents who didn't support her, who forced her to go to therapists who tried to change her gender identity and or perceived sexual orientation, to a school system that wasn't supportive. And I think, what would she have been like? What could she have achieved if she had just gotten the affirmations from her family, from the schools, from society around her, that she's actually wonderful and beautiful and good just as she is, right? I mean, that's all that kids need and youth need, and particularly LGBTQ youth do not receive that message.
It's what they need and deserve, and I think I really like the tone that you take. I think it really hits the mark there, and truly makes a difference. I think the problem is that the other people who discriminate, be it knowingly or unknowingly, and certainly there's a lot of that, always seem to take it for granted that if you tolerate people, then they're doing a good thing. But they don't seem to realize that when you teach in whatever social institution, be it churches or schools or what have you, that a certain group are different and are not somehow to be respected, it just leads to all sorts of trouble. And it really brings home the point that you just can't, and we hit upon the marriage issue again, is that you just can't be just tolerant of it, but people should go and celebrate and just be happy that we have such a thing and that people do love each other, and that's something to be happy about.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, I think we would all be celebrating when two people can find each other and know that they want to spend the rest of their lives together and have made that commitment, and I think that's extraordinary. And I'm realistic, right? We're never going to convince everyone in the country that LGBT people are equally worthy of dignity and respect, and I think that's actually fine, But the question is, how do we as a society and how do we as a government of laws, what do we condone? What do we encourage? What is the message that we send? That is, for me, the more important question, as opposed to just a few individuals who may always believe what they want to believe. Because
people respect the law and follow the law, and therefore whatever the law is.
Absolutely. The law is, such a powerful statement from the government saying what we believe is moral and what is good, right? So let's take the transgender protections in Massachusetts, for example. So we were really excited to support the Transgender Equality Act in Massachusetts, which protected transgender people from discrimination. And at the same time, we are enormously disappointed that the legislature stripped out protections in public accommodations at the last minute. So basically what that means is a transgender person in Massachusetts is protected from employment discrimination, let's say in a restaurant. So a restaurant can't discriminate against a transgender person applying for a job, but they could discriminate against that transgender person for wanting to eat at that restaurant. So not only does that
Which is crazy,
right? So not only does that make no sense, but the message it sends
is devaluing.
Is so devaluing. It says that it is okay to treat transgender people less than in this context because they are less than. I think that is enormously damaging to our community as a whole, and then going back to what we were talking about before, to the youth.
And I think people underestimate it. I think they underestimate the damage to children growing up who are LGBTQ, and people don't appreciate that. One of the last guests I had on the show said that in his organization, he ran a youth group in Central Mass,